B, me Caden mid-20s, work as a line cook at a mid-sized restaurant downtown. Not a fancy place, not a dive either. Somewhere in the middle where the food is actually decent and the shifts are genuinely brutal. Been doing this for a few years at this point, and I'm good at it. Learn it under someone who didn't explain much. You either figured it out or you got yelled at until you did. I figured it out. The job has a logic to it. I respect, a clear standard. You either hit it during service or you don't. No ambiguity, no politics. No one cares about your emotional state when tickets are piling up. I like that about it. Life outside the kitchen is simple by design, small apartment. A few friends I see here and there. Not a lot of noise, not because anything went wrong, just because I figured out early that I didn't need a lot going on around me to be okay. Some people find that strange. They assume something must be missing. Nothing's missing. I just have a low maintenance setting. I show up, I do the work, I go home, met her at a birthday thing for someone I went to school with. Almost didn't go because it had been a long week. And the guy whose birthday it was always threw parties that ran until 2 a.m. Went anyway because I hadn't seen him in a few months, and it felt like the right thing to do. She was already there. When I arrived, noticed her before she noticed me. Not hard to do, because she was holding court at a table of 5 or 6 people talking fast, gesturing with her drink, making some kind of argument about something I couldn't hear the content from where I was standing. Just the shape of it, confident in that specific way, where the person just assumes everyone is interested in what they have to say. Some people perform that confidence, and some people actually have it. She seemed like she actually had it. I got a drink, found the guy whose birthday it was, talked to him for a while later, in the evening. The group she was with split up and she ended up near where I was standing, completely by accident, on both sides. We started talking, and it was different one-on-one than I'd expected from watching her across the room. Less performing, more actual exchange. She asked what I did, and I told her, and she seemed genuinely curious about it, which people often aren't. A lot of people here cook and immediately start sorting you into a category in their head. She asked real questions. What kind of food, what the hours were like, whether I actually liked it or just did it. I answered honestly, and she listened, which I noticed because it's rarer than it should be. She was studying something at the time, had read a lot, had opinions about most things, talked fast, but wasn't just waiting for her turn to talk. We ended up in a corner of that apartment for 2 hours, without either of us planning for that to happen. She texted me before I'd even gotten home. That night we started seeing each other. After that first few weeks were good. She was a lot, in terms of volume and energy and the amount of things she had to say about everything. But interesting, the kind of person who reads something and then needs to talk about it to process it. I'd listen and contribute when I had something worth adding, and stay quiet when I didn't. She said she liked that, said I was grounding. I took it as a compliment and figured it was just a decent fit. We settled into a rhythm pretty naturally, few nights a week together, separate lives in between. It worked. She was the kind of person who had a cause at all times, not in an annoying way necessarily, more like she couldn't be interested in something halfway. If she cared about a topic, she was going to read about it, talk about it, have positions on it. I found this interesting for the most part. Even when I didn't share the positions, she'd ask what I thought about things, and I'd tell her, honestly, and she seemed to like, that I didn't just agree with her. Said most people in her life either agreed immediately or got defensive, and I did neither. We'd go back and forth on things. Sometimes I'd push back when I had a reason to, and she'd either update her position or hold it better than before. It was fine. One thing I noticed early was that her framework for relationships was very defined. She'd clearly thought about it a lot, read about it, talked about it with her friends. She had a specific idea of what a healthy relationship looked like and what a toxic one looked like, and she was very comfortable applying those labels. I didn't think much of it at the time. It seemed like self-awareness, which is generally a good thing. The first time it connected to me directly was minor. She mentioned that her last relationship had ended, partly because he'd been controlling, described it carefully, gave examples checking her phone, questioning who she was out with, getting angry when she made plans without consulting him first. I said that sounded exhausting. She said it was, and she said she'd learned from it that she needed someone who trusted her. I said trust seemed like the baseline for any relationship that made sense. She said exactly. And most men didn't understand that. I didn't push back on the most men part because I had nothing to gain from it. But I filed it away. I remember the first time she mentioned an ex, like It was just a normal thing to bring up. We were at her place. She was cooking dinner. I was at the kitchen counter. She just brought this guy up while she was doing something on the stove. Gave his name, said he'd been into CrossFit, worked in finance, was genuinely funny, but had some issues, described a trip they'd taken. A couple of memories from when they were together. She wasn't being dramatic about it or making a point. It just came out naturally in the flow of talking. I sat there and listened, didn't feel anything in particular. Some guy she'd been with before me. Okay, that's how history works. People have history. She finished what she was saying and looked at me waiting for something. I didn't have a reaction to give her, so I said something like, "Yeah, makes sense," and kept eating. She smiled, said she really appreciated that I wasn't the type to get weird about her past. Said a lot of guys made it into a whole thing, and she'd always found that exhausting. Said something about how insecurity in men, specifically that kind of jealousy over history, was just so draining to deal with. I agreed, broadly, because it seemed reasonable to agree with. If someone's past makes you fall apart, that's your issue, not theirs. She nodded like I'd said something wise. I didn't think much of the exchange at the time, just figured it was her way of processing something. Some people talk through their past to put it somewhere. I don't really do that myself, but I understand it. We kept seeing each other, maybe 3 weeks later. She brought up another, one different person, an artist type. They'd traveled together at some point. She described it fondly, again very casual, just worked into a conversation about something else. I did the same thing I'd done before, listened, didn't react. She did the same thing she'd done before, said something about how refreshing it was to be with someone who didn't need to make everything about ownership, said the word secure, and meant it as a compliment pointed at me. I said thanks and meant it back. It happened again after that. And then again, by the 4th or 5th time, I started noticing the structure. She'd bring someone up, with some detail attached. A personality trait or a trip or something. They used to do, I'd give her nothing. She'd say something positive about my nothing. The nothing was being rewarded, which is a strange loop to be inside of. I wasn't performing calm. I was genuinely calm. It just started feeling like a test. I was passing on repeat without being told the name of the test. There was one evening where she brought someone up, and then immediately said, "Tell me if this bothers you. I want you to be honest." I said it didn't bother me. She looked at me for a long second, then said, "Most men say that, and mean something else." I said, "I mean it." She said, "How can you tell the difference between actually not being bothered and just suppressing it?" I thought about that and said, "Because I'm not thinking about the guy, I'm thinking about what I want to eat later." She laughed, said that was either the healthiest thing she'd ever heard, or the most emotionally detached. I said, I didn't see how those were different. In this case, the stories had a pattern inside of them that I also started noticing after a while, whatever the relationship had been like. In the good parts, eventually the guy had done something that fit one of her categories: jealous, controlling, emotionally unavailable, unable to handle her independence. The categories were consistent even if the details changed. I never said this out loud, but I was aware of it. The stories weren't just memories, they were case studies. And I was apparently the control group. She also had a specific vocabulary she used constantly. The word toxic came up all the time, applied to her exes, to men she heard about through friends, to behaviors she'd read about online. Jealousy was toxic, possessiveness was toxic, needing to know where someone was going was toxic, questioning who someone's friends were was toxic, needing constant validation was toxic. I didn't argue with any of it, because most of it was actually reasonable. If you can't trust your partner, you shouldn't be with them. That's just logic. But I noticed she had a very developed taxonomy for male failure, and she referred to it often. Every story about a past relationship eventually landed on something he'd done that fit one of these categories. I started to feel like I was being measured against a checklist I hadn't been given, not in a way I could point to specifically and say, this is a problem, just in a way I was aware of. Her friends apparently found me baffling. She told me this one evening, laughing about it. They'd asked her to describe me, and she described me as calm and not jealous. And she said they couldn't figure out what to do with that. One of them had apparently asked if I was emotionally available at all, or just politely disengaged. Another had suggested that men who seemed totally unbothered were usually hiding something. She defended me, said I was just actually secure. Said it was possible for a person to not have those patterns, seemed proud of it, like my calm was something she'd found and could show off. I found it funny, in the abstract. The restaurant hired a new sous chef around this point. She came in one morning, got introduced to the team, Didn't make a big deal of herself, just tied her apron and got into it. You can tell within about 10 minutes of a real service whether someone actually knows what they're doing or is just pretending she knew. Clean movements, good timing, no unnecessary questions, no drama. I told the head chef at the end of the first week that she was a solid hire working with competent people. Makes the whole kitchen run better. That's just how it is. We started figuring out how we communicated. Different people have different rhythms and you have to calibrate. By the end of the second week, we had a groove. She'd call something out. I'd respond. It went both ways. No friction outside of what needed to be talked about for the job. We didn't talk a lot. I don't have a habit of getting into people's personal lives at work. I assume other people want the same, unless they tell me otherwise. Occasionally something absurd would happen during a service, and we'd both end up laughing about it. After kitchen humor is its own genre, not really translatable to people who haven't been in one inside jokes that form instantly around near disasters and miscommunications and things that go wrong in specific ways. None of it means anything outside of those walls. She got it, I got it. That was the extent of the connection. I want to be clear about that, because it matters for the rest of this. There was nothing there except two people who worked well together. I've worked with plenty of people I didn't get along with, and I've worked with people I did get along with. The ones you get along with make the shifts better. That's it. My girlfriend came to pick me up one evening after a shift. She did this sometimes when she was nearby and felt like it, which I didn't mind. I was outside near the back talking to the sous chef about something that needed to be sorted before the next day, a delivery that was coming in at the wrong time, or a prep question, something like that. We were mid-conversation when my girlfriend walked up. I finished the sentence I was in, then introduced them. They said hello, exchanged a few words, went their way. We went ours in the car. My girlfriend asked how long the new girl had been working there. I said I wasn't sure exactly, maybe 6 or 7 weeks. She said she seemed nice. I said, yeah, she was good at her job. That was the whole conversation about it. She was a bit quieter than usual that evening, but I put it down to a long day. I was tired from the shift and didn't have a lot of energy for reading into things. We ate something and went to sleep, and it was fine sometime after that, maybe a week or more. She asked if we ever hung out outside of work. I said no, we just talked about work. She said she wasn't asking for any specific reason, just wondering, then said something about how she was pretty. I actually thought about it for a second, before answering, which I don't think she expected. Said probably I hadn't really been paying attention to that. She looked at me, I could tell that wasn't the response she'd been waiting for. I think she expected me to say something like, not really, or not compared to you, or some version of reassurance. I didn't say it because it hadn't occurred to me, and also because it would have felt fake. She moved on to something else and I let it go. Things were okay for a bit, normal rhythm, a few nights a week, nothing unusual. Then the questions started coming with a bit more shape to them. How late did we usually stay after service? Who was around at the end of the night? Typically, did the kitchen staff eat together? Sometimes after close. I answered all of it because there was nothing to hide, but I was aware that the questions had a destination. She was building a map of something, even if she wasn't saying what it was. There was a stretch of maybe 2 weeks where it came up, in small ways, pretty regularly. A comment here, a question there, nothing big enough to actually address. Directly, she mentioned once that a coworker getting too close is how a lot of relationships fall apart. Said it like she was saying something she'd read, not something she was feeling. I said I'd heard that. She said it was important to maintain transparency in those situations. I said I agreed. She said she appreciated that. I understood that. I said sure, we kept moving, but the shape of those 2 weeks was clear enough. She was circling something she didn't want to name directly, probably because naming it would mean asking me something, and I might answer it in a way she didn't want. Then she told me a story about a friend said this friend had been in a relationship where her boyfriend developed a close friendship with someone at work over time. And it hadn't been an affair exactly, but it had slowly hollowed out the relationship. Described it with a lot of detail, how the friend hadn't seen it coming, how it looked from the outside. Then she looked at me like she'd said something significant. I asked if there was something she actually wanted to ask me. She said no, she was just sharing something that happened to someone she knew. I said okay, but we both understood what had just happened. She brought up the CrossFit finance guy again. Around this time said he'd texted her out of nowhere, and they'd had a short back and forth, just catching up. Nothing serious. Same tone she always used, same expression, same pause at the end, while she waited for the nothing I gave her. The nothing she started doing the thing where she validates the nothing. Said she was glad I wasn't the type to get paranoid about something like that. Said she'd been with men who would have treated that text like a crime scene. I said that sounded exhausting for everyone involved. Then I said, so the same logic applies the other way, right? She asked what I meant. I said, you're not bothered by me working closely with someone every day, are you? She said, of course not. I said, good, that's consistent. I appreciate that. Then I said, I just wanted to make sure we were applying the same standard in both directions. She said it wasn't the same thing. I asked what was different. She said the context was different. I said, I'd like to understand the difference if she could explain it. She thought about it for a moment, couldn't really find the words for it, said it was just different and moved on. I let it go, but I filed it somewhere. The restaurant was getting busier around this period, more covers, longer services, the kitchen running harder than usual. The sous chef and I were coordinating more out of necessity when volume increases. You have to communicate more. It's not a choice. Prep lists, timing, ordering, staffing for the weekend, all of it needed more attention. I was seeing my girlfriend slightly less because I was more exhausted when I got home. She said she understood, but the texts during my shifts increased not constantly, just noticeably more than before, small things. Asking when I'd be done, what I wanted to do later, checking in, I'd answer when I could, which was sometimes not until service ended. She'd say she understood, but there was something in the way she said it, that specific kind of understanding that has a weight to it. I probably could have been better at checking in, I'll say that. But I also wasn't going to text during a service where things were moving fast. That's just not how a kitchen works. At some point, she said she felt like I was more present at the restaurant than I was with her. I said I was at the restaurant more hours than I was with her, which was just factually true. She said that wasn't what she meant. I said I understood what she meant. And I'd try to be better about the check-ins, and I meant it. She said okay. But I noticed the framing had shifted slightly. The restaurant was now something adjacent to the problem. Not just a scheduling issue. The sous chef was attached to the restaurant. It was all getting connected in her head in a way I could track even if she wasn't saying it directly. I didn't know what to do with that, other than keep showing up and hope the map she was building matched the actual territory. The restaurant did a small thing at some point. After a good stretch of weeks, owner bought food and drinks. Everyone stayed after close, low-key, maybe an hour and a half. I told my girlfriend and she wanted to come. So she came, she met a few people, talked to some of the front of house staff. Mostly they were easier for her to connect with. More conversational, her kind of people. I watched her at one point from across the room and she looked fine. Laughing at something, drink in hand, doing well. Thought, good. She's having a good time. At some point during the evening, the sous chef was nearby and said something about an incident from a service earlier that week. One of those things that is genuinely not funny. Unless you were in the kitchen when it happened, it involved a miscommunication about timing and about 3 minutes of everyone moving very fast and saying very little. If you were outside looking in, you would have just seen 2 people under pressure inside it. There was something ridiculous about it that only made sense if you'd been there. I laughed because I was there, and it was actually funny. The sous chef moved on. I went back to my drink. It didn't think about it in the moment at all. Later at home, she said, I seem very comfortable with her. I said, yeah, we work together. You develop a kind of ease with people. You're in the same space with every day. She said it looked like more than just professional familiarity. I asked what she meant exactly. She said she didn't know. It just felt like there was something there. I told her there wasn't. She said she wasn't accusing me of anything. She wanted to be clear about that. She just wanted to share how it had felt from where she was standing. I said, okay, I hear you. What do you need from me? Now she said she needed me to take her feelings seriously. I said I was taking them seriously. That's why I was asking what she needed. She said acknowledgement was enough. She just wanted to feel heard. I said I heard her. She said it didn't feel like it. When I asked follow-up questions instead of just sitting with it, I said I asked follow-up questions because I wanted to actually address what she was feeling, not just say the words she said. That was the difference between us. I said, maybe we moved on, or I thought we did. A few days later, she came over and you could tell from the moment she walked in that she'd been sitting with something all day, the kind of quiet that has pressure in it. She sat across from me and said, she'd been doing a lot of thinking lately. Said she'd also talked to her friends and done some reading. Said she thought I had patterns consistent with emotional unavailability. Said the specific term was avoidant attachment. I asked her to explain what she meant by that. She explained it. Said it was about maintaining emotional distance without appearing to, about keeping people at arm's length through calm instead of through conflict. Said people with these patterns often seemed secure on the surface, but were actually just avoiding real closeness. I listened to all of it. Then I said, the way I've been handling things is exactly what you told me was the right way every time you told me about someone you'd been with. And I didn't react. You said that was emotional maturity every time something came up about your past. And I didn't make it an interrogation. You said you were glad I wasn't controlling. I've been operating by the model you described as healthy. She said that wasn't what she meant. I said I genuinely wanted to understand the difference between what she'd praised and what she was now describing as a problem. She said I was turning it into a logical exercise instead of just feeling something. I said I was feeling confused, and that seemed like a relevant feeling to have in this conversation. She said this was the pattern, making everything into a debate. I said I wasn't debating. I was asking a question so I could understand the standard. If the standard changed, I wanted to know what it changed. She said the standard wasn't the point. The point was that she needed to feel like I was actually here with her. I said I was here, physically, choosing to have this conversation instead of walking away from it. She said that was the bare minimum. I said fair. What was above the bare minimum? I genuinely wanted to know. She said she needed to feel like I was afraid of losing her. Like the idea of her leaving meant something to me. I said I didn't want to lose her. She said I didn't act like it. I said I didn't know how to act afraid in a way that was real and not just a performance performing fear. I didn't actually have seemed worse than being honest about what I actually felt. She said what I actually felt sounded a lot. Like nothing I said that wasn't accurate, I just didn't perform it loudly. She said she needed someone who performed it loudly. Then we went quiet after a bit. She said she'd been reading about male emotional unavailability, and a lot of what she'd read described patterns she saw in me. Said the calmness that she'd originally found attractive was possibly just a way of not being present. Said she'd been thinking that what she'd called security might actually just be indifference. I sat with that for a second, then I said, you can't have it both ways. You built the model yourself. You told me not reacting to your past was healthy. You told me not interrogating your friendships was respectful. You told me staying calm when things got uncomfortable was emotional maturity. I followed that model, and now the same behavior is being reframed as indifference. So, which one is it? She said it depended on what was underneath the behavior. I said she didn't have access to what was underneath my behavior any more than I had access to hers. She said she could feel what was underneath. I said that wasn't a standard I could work with because I couldn't change what she felt, only what I did. She said this was exactly it, making everything about logic and defensibility. Said it was a form of toxicity that didn't look like toxicity because it was quiet. Said men who seemed unbothered were often just checked out. Said she'd been reading about it, and there was a name for this kind of pattern. I said, I'm sure there is. She said I didn't have to be dismissive. I said I wasn't being dismissive. I was just noting that there's a name for everything these days. She said that was dismissive. I said okay. She stood up, said she needed to clear her head. I said okay. She left. I sat at the table for a while. After she went, wasn't angry, wasn't crushed, was mostly just running through the situation. Slowly I'd behaved the way she asked me to behave. The same behavior that had been right when applied to her past was now wrong. When applied to my present, the rule moved when it was pointed in my direction, which maybe wasn't intentional on her part. Maybe she genuinely hadn't seen the contradiction from inside it, but the contradiction was real regardless of intent. I sat there long enough that the room got dark without me doing anything about it. Eventually turned a light on, made something to eat, sat back down. She texted me later that night, said she wasn't ending things, just needed to process. I replied that she should take whatever time she needed, and I meant it without any particular edge behind it. She came back the next evening, different energy this time, not charged the same way. Sat across from me at the table and said she thought she'd been unfair. I said I didn't think she was trying to be unfair. I thought she'd gotten into a pattern she hadn't examined from the inside. She sat with that for a second, then asked if I was still in this. I said yes, otherwise I wouldn't be here. She asked if I was interested in her, or just comfortable with the arrangement. I actually thought about how to answer that, honestly, before I said anything. Said she was interesting. I paid attention when she talked. I made choices to be here. That was interest. She nodded, then said she felt like she couldn't reach me. Sometimes said there was a wall she kept running into. I said that was probably accurate. I wasn't an easy person to read, but But the wall wasn't the same as nothing being there. She said she understood that intellectually, but it didn't help her feel it. I said I could try to be more deliberate about showing up in the ways that actually mattered to her. Asked what those were specifically, so I wasn't guessing she named a few things: more check-ins when I was at work, more verbal acknowledgement when she told me something difficult, less going quiet when things got tense. All of it seemed reasonable. I said I would work on those things. She looked like some weight had shifted. We talked for a while longer, and it felt like we'd actually gotten somewhere. Felt like a real conversation. For the first time in a while, then, she came back to the coworker, said she was still uncomfortable with it. I asked what specifically bothered her. She said the ease, the laughing at the staff thing, the sense that I was more open in that context than I was with her. I said I was more relaxed at work in general, because I'd been doing it for years, and I knew what was expected of me there. She said it was a sad thing to say about a relationship, that a job felt easier. I said that wasn't what I meant. I meant familiarity, not comfort in terms of preference. She said it still didn't feel good to hear. I said I understood. Then I said, "You talk to your ex sometimes?" And I've never said a word about it. She said, "Yes," I said, "because that's what you told me a secure person does." She said, "Yes," I said, "so I'm doing the same thing right now. I'm not making your discomfort into a crisis. I'm sitting with it. I'm asking what would help." She said it wasn't the same. I asked why. She thought for a moment. Said it just wasn't. I said I wasn't trying to corner her in an argument. I genuinely just wanted to know what the rule was, so I could follow it. She said it wasn't about rules. I said, then I didn't know how to navigate it, because without a consistent rule, I was just guessing what would be wrong next. She went quiet. I said something I'd been thinking for a while at this point, but hadn't said out loud. Said, I think what you want is someone secure enough not to feel threatened by your past and your connections, but insecure enough to visibly panic at the thought of losing you. Those two things pull against each other. You can't design a person to be both. She looked at me, said that wasn't what she wanted. I said, maybe not consciously, but that's what the situation had been asking for. This whole time she didn't argue, just sat there for a moment, then said, maybe I need to think about what I actually want. Said she wasn't sure the version of a relationship she'd been looking for was internally consistent. I said I'd been thinking about what I wanted too. Said what I wanted was something that operated on consistent terms, not terms that meant emotional maturity when applied one direction and emotional unavailability when applied the other. She said she hurt. Me said she didn't think we were in the same place about what this needed to be. I said that might be true. Said I thought she was a good person who'd thought seriously about how relationships should work and had just maybe built a framework that only ran one way. She looked at me for a second after I said that was probably the most honest thing anyone had said to her in a while. I said I wasn't trying to be cruel with it. She said she knew we sat there for a while without talking. It didn't feel hostile, just quiet in the way things go. Quiet when they're over. She got up, picked up her bag, put on her shoes by the door. Said she'd think about things. I said okay. She left the door closed without any particular drama, just the normal sound of it. I stayed at the table for a while, after no particular thoughts, just the quiet. Eventually the quiet got comfortable, and I stopped waiting for anything to happen. In it, made something to eat. Went to bed alarm at 6:30, got to the restaurant before most of the team, which was the usual long prep list. Waiting, the sous chef came in, not long after me, already in her apron, already looking at the same prep list. She asked if I was ready for the day. I said yeah. She said good, because it was going to be a long one. I picked up my knife and got started, and that was that.